What's going on? Welcome back to another episode of Performance Talk, where we like to talk to real people, have real conversations. And today we are with Splunk. And you may not know what Splunk is. A lot of you might not know what happens into the background. If you've never seen Wizard of Oz, big face, but there's a small man behind the curtain. That's where big things really do happen. Today I have Chris and Corey with me from Splunk. How are you guys doing? I am doing great, man. I am doing great. So I did ask Chris this question, Corey, like pretty much everything for Splunk continues as is after the Formula One season or any competitive season. So if you could tell people what Splunk is and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. So Splunk is a data platform that is really designed to help, if you think of our main ways that, Splunk is used in the world is really around monitoring all of the technology that organizations use to empower their business process. And so we help bring security and observability to that because you got to make sure that all those services are resilient. So you imagine the storefronts of your favorite companies, the websites of your favorite companies, the physical locations, the scanners, the devices. Splunk monitors that machine-generated data and helps turn data into doing and really bring some decision-making capabilities to all this crazy amounts of data being created in the world.
That's a lot. So how much were we talking about? Like when you say crazy amounts, what's a crazy amount?
The funny story is that there are people that there are organizations that ingest multiple petabytes per day into a Splunk platform. So a petabyte, if you don't know, is 1,000 terabytes every single day of brand new data being created that is about what's happening in their technology enterprise. So across all these data centers and clouds and all this nonsense that people have to build to run modern businesses, Splunk is really that platform that helps people understand, is it working like it should? Is something not working like it should? Is somebody doing something they shouldn't be doing? And trying to make sure and protect it and make sure it's working well.
Okay. Now, Chris, I remember you saying something very interesting, and actually you even showed me that how pretty much data is like everywhere. It's just about knowing how to reach out and grab it. So could you explain some of that to people so that we can kind of give them some continuity of like what is the gist of what we're really talking about before we go into the whole steaks and potatoes of it all?
Yeah. And actually, I used to work at a financial company. I was the lead Splunk engineer for them. They brought me in, they promoted me up from our application support team. And what that meant was I was one of the people that was responsible for all the internal applications that we ran. So all the developers made internal applications that made the business run. And all of that generates data. And all of that data is useful for those developers. Is it running the way that we've designed it to? It's useful for the business analysts. Is this making the money that we think it should be making? It's useful for the executives. Is this delivering on how we want it to deliver? So all of those applications fed into Splunk, and it was my job to make sure that all of that data looked the way that it should to the people who were looking at it. And we were doing multiple terabytes a day of security data. Did we get hacked that day? And how did we get hacked? Usually the answer was no. And did our applications run? We had a case where application was running fine. Everything was green, but the business transactions dropped off. Nothing was running. And it turns out Splunk found that the website was just dropping people, like dropping connections off the shopping cart as soon as they were checking out. And we would have never known that if it weren't for Splunk. Our previous process, it would have taken us 3 months to figure that out, to go back through that data. So that's the kind of stuff that we do for just businesses in general, is give them visibility into their own data and make it make sense for all of the different people that have stake in that.
Okay, so how did you all do that with Formula One? Yeah. Particularly, I believe that your connection is with McLaren, which is where I met you. How did you do that for them?
Yeah, so fantastic question, and I'll jump in, and Chris, you can add any color you want. So we started as a strategic partner for McLaren, meaning we're a sponsor of their F1 team about 3 years ago now. And when we started that partnership, McLaren is like every other racing team. They obviously look for partners who want to help fund, racing operations and be part of it and have that beautiful, their logo on the side of the car, have these hospitality experiences to where you can take, customers to these awesome events. Formula One events are crazy cool. But McLaren, I think, is one of those companies that has done, I think, a more visible and, I think maybe a better job of leaning on their technology partners specifically and saying, hey, it's cool that we're, that you're sponsoring and you're getting all this benefit, but like, is there a way for us to actually partner with you and you bring the thing that you do really well into making McLaren more competitive? And so that's really what Splunk has been doing over the last few years, is working with McLaren to understand what are the areas where we can help deliver competitive advantage with data specifically and help them go, try to compete for championships. And so we've started that. We've done a handful of, really exciting projects with McLaren. So, if you can imagine, any Formula One racing team, when they go out trackside at those sites around the world, every single one of them has to roll basically like a data center out next to the track.
Yeah,
Because if you think
I've
about
seen
it, right?
that.
Yeah, okay, so every F1 car today has over 300 sensors on it. Those sensors, so each team is dealing with 600 sensors that are sampling at 10,000 times a second. They're creating over 1.5 terabytes of just sensor data every single weekend on track. And so that data is crucial. They literally cannot get the cars on track if those sensors and the telemetry, which is what we call kind of all this sensor data, this telemetry, if that telemetry system isn't reporting properly and isn't giving the race teams and the engineers visibility into what's going on in the cars, they don't go on track. And so Splunk is not the company. Like, McLaren has been developing sensors and, race technology for 30 plus years, actually 60 plus years now. But Splunk actually came alongside them and said, hey, isn't like collecting all that telemetry pretty mission critical? Like, you don't win a race if you don't get the car on track, right? They said, yeah. And we said, okay. So in order to run all that stuff, you have this servers and network and storage in this data center in a box that you roll out onto a trackside that has to run well, right? And they said, yeah. We said, that's what we do. Let us monitor that. Let us make sure that that telemetry service is up and running well, and that we identify if there's going to be, and we predict using AI and machine learning to say, is there going to be any interruptions to that mission critical telemetry service?
Okay.
So then we take a look at that data and we say, hey, I don't know if you guys know, but there's like, there's 30 to 60 engineers trackside for each team, but there's hundreds of engineers back in each of the company's headquarters. So like in Woking at the McLaren Technology Center, there's, 60 engineers sitting in this room called Mission Control. And Mission Control is where they've got these screens up and they're looking, what's going on track, what's going on in the car. And so we make sure that that data gets from trackside back to Mission Control, and that all the applications and systems running at Mission Control are running as they should. And again, using the power of Splunk, because that's what we do. Like, we look at data and we use AI to prevent and predict outages. Like, you can think of it really simply. And so that's what we're doing for the McLaren Formula One team today. And I hope we'll get a chance to dig into it, because I want to go full nerd on esports in a minute, because there's some really fun stories there. But that's the kind of the big picture of what we're doing with McLaren's Formula One team.
Got you. Okay, so this is what I was going to get into next, because I read somewhere that basically esports is bigger than 2 other industries combined, including movies. This is what I've heard. Like, it's getting that big. And even I, on Sundays at 11 a.m., have a grudge racing series where I invite drivers from around the world to compete. And it is getting big. And I created that because I think there needs to be some sort of platform and respect, like in the general senses of people that compete in esports. I know some people feel like it's not a sport, but technically it is a sport. It takes skill, it takes practice, it takes routine, it takes development, all of that stuff. So I do consider it a sport. What does Splunk do, and how did you all come to basically make a vast difference in the competitiveness of the Shadow team?
Yeah, for sure. So when we signed our agreement with McLaren to sponsor their Formula One team, they came to us and they said, hey, we'd like you to look at sponsoring our esports team because we think it makes a lot of sense from a synergy perspective. Esports is super dependent upon technology, right? It's the audiences that are into esports competitions are largely employed in like IT and security type jobs where they could
Correct.
potentially use something like Splunk. And so they thought, hey, this is a really good brand, sort of alignment for our esports and with what Splunk does. And we said, yeah, that's true. And so we started, kind of a process of working with their McLaren's esports team is called McLaren Shadow. So we started working with some of the team managers. And for those folks who don't really know about esports teams, like these are multi-million-dollar well-funded teams that drivers make good money. They have full-time engineers that their job is to work on tuning and setups and, strategy prep. McLaren has this year, they have a head of strategy and engineering, like a dude that literally came from Formula One and worked in digital operations there and is now leading strategy. So over the last 3 years, we've been consistently sort of working with them on how do we get the same kinds of data that the Formula One in real life teams would want. How do we get that data out of the game platforms or the sim platforms and then start to deliver some of the same capabilities that those Formula One teams are using and those same sort of like strategy kind of question and answer things they want to do with data? How do we deliver that to esports? And so really it culminated. The most exciting thing I can tell you, I'll send you some links that we can send out. There are some really cool videos, but the most exciting thing is we partnered with the F1 esports season, McLaren's approach this season, and their new head of strategy came to us and said, it's cool that we have some data about the car and about tires and about some of that stuff, but he had this idea, and it was basically there's this one chart that every strategist in Formula One uses. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's basically and when I say chart, I mean like literally data, XY coordinates on a plane. And what they're charting over time is just how's everybody stacking up in the field compared to each other, but compared to a reference lap, which would be like a lap record or the fastest lap of a session. And what you can do with that data is then you can see the field sort of as the race unfolds. You can start to see patterns. Like there's a good example in a webcast we did that I'll send you the link for, where it was a wet race. And as you started to see lap times come in and get plotted, you noticed that all the people that were on wet tires, their lap times were getting worse more quickly as the track would dry up. And the people on the intermediates, they were kind of getting not as bad. They were kind of slower at first, but as the track dried out, they were starting to catch up with that lap time delta of the ones on the wet tires. And so what McLaren could do is they could predict based on those slopes of those tire degradations and lap times, what is the right time for me to pit based on it? And we know, like at Zandvoort, it's a 26-second, penalty. Basically, you lose 26 seconds of lap time every time you pit. Right. When is the right point to give up those 26 seconds and where will I come out? And so we actually gave them the ability from F1 Esports, right, the game by EA Sports. It exposes more than 200 metrics in real time, including sector data about every single racer. And we actually were able to build that for F1 Esports for the McLaren team only. They were the only ones that had it. Right. And it turned out pretty good because I don't know if you noticed, but they won this year, both the constructors and the drivers.
Big shout out to the Shadow team, definitely.
That's right. Way to go, George, and Lucas, the driver, and Barry, the drivers on the team. Daniel all did really, really good.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. So let me ask you this question. Did you all ever have the opportunity, and I say opportunity like it's a great thing, but it may not be a great thing, but it is if it's like you get to solve and see why this has happened, porpoising. It happened this year, 2022, coming into Formula One, ground effects, porpoising plagued it. Was that ever something that was realized in esports?
The simulation platform doesn't exhibit the same sort of granularity and physical response.
Explain that
at that level. So there's some things that you can that a simulation engine, the physics engine behind it, will understand, and there's some things that will be call it assumed or projected. So porpoising was something that was an unexpected challenge that the in real life racers experienced based on the vacuum pressure of the cars underneath, because the big picture right between the last year and this year on the cars was it went from downforce being the primary component of creating traction that was pushing air across the top of the car to
Correct.
they were trying to actually create negative pressure under the car
Correct.
so that you would have the car naturally being sucked down, right? So that was it creates less of a dirty airflow behind the cars, so you could have that more competitive racing. And so in the F1 sport and the F1 game, we just didn't see the same sort of change. Now you can actually measure it. We actually didn't actually talk about it and look for it. You actually get data. So all the F1 in real life teams monitor the deflection rate of the springs at each corner, right? So how much from the kind of the baseline, if the car's kind of sitting static, how much is the spring compressed or non-compressed over time? And in porpoising, you can see that data, you can see that vibration because it's literally deltas between the front and the back of the car going like this. And if you see those values not kind of going together, you can kind of guess that it's porpoising. We just didn't see it in the simulation in the esports, at least as far as the data we saw in the races that we've run. We never saw it, and I don't remember the Shadow team ever bringing that up as a reality that was challenging them. And frankly, let's talk about this. Porpoising wouldn't suck near as bad in the simulators as it would in a real car. Could you imagine the real life?
That's a fact. That was good. Yeah. That was good. So, all right. So, what, like, we have mission control, like they have mission control Formula One teams. Mm-hmm. Is there a similar thing with the Shadow team? But is it to the same magnitude? Is it the same volume size as a regular team? Like, how is, in grand scheme, like I have an X Max, it's like 1/5 scale. Then you got my daughter's car, it's 1/10 scale. Like, in what scale is it in comparison to real Formula One?
So, I mean, what I would say is like it's clearly not close to the scale, just based on the revenue available for the particular team. So yes, esports and gaming as an industry combined are bigger than film and music today, like in terms of total revenues. Oh, I may have lost some connection here, but we'll come back in a second.
You could.
No, it's all good. So they're huge industries, okay? But the problem is each individual team doesn't make the kind of money that like an F1 team will make. Because the F1 team, while F1 is smaller than esports overall, there's only 10 actual teams competing in it, and they make all the money. Whereas in the gaming and esports industry overall, you've got lots of distributed things that make that number up. Things like the Call of Duty series and Fortnite and every game on every phone and stuff. So it's a little bit disingenuous to say that they're like the same or one's bigger than the other. They're just kind of different. To give you a team perspective, like the Formula One team is hundreds of people, and it's hundreds of people. It's billions of dollars being spent. Well, I guess the market cap now is not quite that much, but it's lots of money being spent.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. The esports team is not that big, right? They don't have hundreds of people. They have tens of people that are having roles from driver. Drivers are obviously the most sort of visible role, but then you have team managers that do things like make sure that they arrange travel and food and all the things that have to do where you get all the drivers in a room there in the MTC to be there for a week of training. And then you have managers who are monitoring the training. You have strategists and engineers who are looking at each of the tracks and the past performance to say who are the right drivers for this, what are the right car setups that we should be using dependent upon weather. And so you're talking it's not even close to the size, but the viewership is growing massively. The opportunity for drivers to actually make the jump from esports driving to real life is actually, there's more and more examples every year of that happening. And I think what excites me most about it is that the esports world is so much more approachable, right? It's so much more available and accessible to the average person. Like if you look across the 20 drivers in the Formula One field today, every one of them is either from they're all from very wealthy families or somebody, a very wealthy benefactor somewhere along the way, because to go through that process is insanely expensive. But you can have somebody go dominate the esports world that is literally a kid with a $1,000 laptop and a $200 steering wheel. And if they're good and willing to spend the time, they can go outdrive people that are, in a simulator that are fantastic. We actually had one of our chief technology advisor and vice president of technology in Europe. he did a TED talk that's already had over like 1.2 million views that talks about the new era of play, and it talks about this concept of like esports being that like accessible way for, specifically in racing, for you to build skills that are transferable to an in real life experience, but in a low cost, highly accessible sort of medium, which I think is fantastic.
Right. That's almost comparable to people saying you can get supercar speed in a super bike, but you don't have to spend supercar money. Like
Exactly.
this is very,
And,
very true.
and think about it
So
this way: like you think about
go
these
ahead.
kids playing like Call of Duty that are like super good with their thumbs, and
Right.
this that's not transferable to if you put a gun in their hand and told them to go fight a battle, they'd be lost. Like they might have some
True.
of the strategy ideas, and yes, you need to hide, but the
Right.
physical part of it is not the same. But in a racing
Yeah.
simulator, if you take somebody who can steer a steering wheel, operate pedals and a shifter or paddles, and they can visibly see things in a simulator, you stick them in a car, there's a really good chance they're going to be fast. And
That
actually,
is true.
the kid that won the world's fastest driver competition in 2017, which is like this big sim thing that McLaren did. It's like the largest sim racing competition. He actually now drives in British GT3, and they put him in,
Word.
and he got that seat because one of his prizes was he got to go sit and do a test lap, and he was one of the fastest dudes of the day in a GT3 car.
Was it at Spa?
No, it was at Silverstone.
In Silverstone. Okay.
Yeah,
I think I remember hearing something about that, but I thought it was at Spa, but okay, it was at Silverstone.
yeah.
That's
I think
cool
that
though.
was, yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, your sim racing can pay off.
Yeah.
So
And
let me
what
ask you this. Let me ask you both this question. I'm going to start with Chris first. What is your coolest situation data related to gaming and just finding something where you were like, damn, I didn't think that would happen or I didn't think we would solve that?
when I saw I used to race, and I still got my simulator behind me.
Oh, why don't you come on Sundays, bro? Why you don't show up on Sundays?
Well, now I will.
Okay.
Send the invite, bro.
But downloading the aim data off of a car where I went instead of second to third, I went second to first, and looking at that line where it goes, and then 9,000, and then nothing, and then da 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 da,
Right.
and just stuff like that. So downloading like telemetry off of my aim data logger, just that alone was invaluable. And when I used to do autocrossing, it was the same thing, even with just pulling data from tire temps, tire pressures. Even that little tiny morsel amount of data was influencing lap times for guys
Yeah.
that were on track. Just the tiniest amount of data can make a huge amount of difference. The difference between knowing what 25 psi is going to do versus 35 psi in my tires, what side is 25 and what's 35? Are they both 35? Or is one side different? What camber do I have my stuff set at? And if I change it from -3 to -1, what is that going to do for me? And when I've got 6 or 7 runs that I can do, or I go out to Gateway, shout out to my home track, and do 20 minutes there, just comparing those static values, even not even monitoring over the course, just being able to compare is so invaluable. And that was the most eye-opening thing for me when I even just started doing this, 15 years ago, and actually getting into cars, was the difference that stuff like tire temps, tire pressure, all that makes. And you don't need some really fancy thing like an aim data logger, or a giant half rack that McLaren wheels out for their telemetry. I was just doing it with pencil and paper and a infrared temperature gun and a tread depth gauge and a tire gauge, and that was it.
Straight
And then
raw
plate for
materials.
adjusting camber on track. Like that was it. That was all I was doing, and it was most definitely influencing the
Damn. I like
speed
that.
I was able to make. Yeah.
I like that. Corey, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give you some McLaren examples that I thought were fun,
Facts.
that my team was able to uncover. Because again, the esports stuff to me, for at least for us, like at Splunk, is really exciting because, like I said, the in real life Formula One, that telemetry data, there's systems that have been built for 30 plus years that monitor that data. That's not really what Splunk does, but
Okay.
McLaren actually does lean on Splunk for their esports data. And so we found two sort of interesting things this past year that created some competitive advantage, and it was actually so good that McLaren was afraid it was cheating. So I'm going to give you a little preamble there. So
All
so
right.
get this. Okay, so in a sim race, like in a competition, there are limitations on who can be logged in, right? So is only the drivers or drivers and a manager, like a spectator, right? They control all that, and depending upon if it's iRacing or if it's the F1 game, whatever. So what they figured out is in F1, the F1 game, so the EA Sports and the official F1 esports, you can't have any spectators logged in. You can only have the racers logged in. And so that's to make sure that there's nothing too much shared, in terms of
Okay.
like somebody trying to hack or do something weird. So what that means is, in order to get data out of the race, we actually have to run an application on the gaming PC of one of the drivers to pull that data out. And so in the F1 game, they actually have this telemetry output called UDP. A lot of games have it. It's like a standard telemetry output. And so what we
Okay.
do is we take that telemetry data from the F1 game from one of the drivers, and we point it into Splunk, and then we start to ask questions of the data. We build some dashboards that show things like Chris was talking about, tire temps and tire pressure and tire degradation. Now, the two cool things that were so like mind-blowing was that all the other teams, when they want to know things about like weather, like what the weather forecast is in the game, because weather's a pretty big input on strategy, right? They
Right.
have to actually ask the drivers. They have to lean over the driver's shoulders or talk over Discord in their ear and say, hey, tab over to the weather overlay in the game so I can see what the weather forecast is, right? And that's how they get data out, as strategists. So in the F1 22 game, you get a 5-minute weather forecast that shows up in the overlays that they can look at. They can't, you can just look at it on screen. What we found out, though, that was interesting is that if you actually pull the telemetry data and you go look at the weather forecast data in real time, you actually get 15 minutes of weather forecast. So 3 times further into the future, by looking at the data that comes out of the game, not just viewing the data that shows up in the overlay, you create a competitive advantage for strategists to where now
Yeah, I
they're
say.
making a 10-minute ahead decision over
Right.
everybody else in the field on data that that was already there. It just, you had to know how to get it. You had to have a data platform that could actually make it easy to ask questions. So we built a forecast overview for them that was literally a dashboard that the strategist ran real time. And so he's just on his laptop. He doesn't have to ask and interrupt his guy and say, hey, tab over to weather so I can take a
Right.
look. He just pulls up the dashboard and goes, hey, in 15 minutes, looks like we got a 30% chance of some rain. That's probably going to impact what I'm doing with my tire and my pit strategy, right? So sort of the same thing. We had one happen where damage doesn't show up very granularly, meaning
Right.
like you don't get a lot of detail. You get like, it only shows up, like if you have rear wing damage, it only shows up once you get over 15%. And it says you have rear wing damage in the overlays. But in the data, you actually get integers of 1% impact. And they found that a 1% damage in a rear wing can have very noticeable impact on track time because of downforce and changes. And so they figured this out because they were on track in some racing sessions, and the drivers were behind each other. So you had one McLaren driver behind the other, and he could see in the simulator that there's clearly damage physically showing up in what the game is rendering, but there was no damage showing up in the overlays. And we went and looked at the data, and it was like it had only got to like 6%, and it wasn't a high enough percentage value to cross whatever threshold it was in the overlay to actually show up. But we saw the data in Splunk, and again, this is not like we're not creating data, we're not doing anything illegal. They actually went to the F1 Esports sort of governing group and said, hey, we're getting this from the game and using it to make decisions. Is that okay? And they're like, well, you can't manufacture the data, so yeah, that's fine. If you're just using real-time data better than everybody else is, then that's how you win. So those are my two favorite ones: the damage and weather forecast that nobody else could find.
Yeah,
That is crazy.
The weather thing,
Right.
I compared that, when I heard that at first, I compared that, if you remember Braun GP and the double diffuser thing way back in the day, it's like that, where Ross Braun was the only one that like figured this out.
Right.
And he went to FIA and was like, "Is this cool? Like, this is not a loophole, but like, it's legal. Can I do that?" And they're like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
And they won everything that year because of that. And it took several races for everybody else to catch up. But like, that's the
Right.
kind of advantage that
Yeah.
being able to see like 3 times ahead of everybody in weather and being
Pretty
able to
good.
see that granular of damage. That's the impact that that kind of has, is when Braun had that double diffuser in, I think it was '09, I want to say.
So who filled out the petition? Because somebody had to be filling out some type of petition.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
always somebody that's like, no, I'm
Oh, yeah.
not gonna be having that. Like somebody
Yeah,
filled
well,
out a
actually,
petition.
I can tell you this: we actually got contacted by 3 of the other Formula One esports teams, and asked if if what we had was available for them to use, and sadly, I had to tell them that, no, some of the things there's a mix, right? So
Right.
we do actually have some public facing capabilities. We have a group that, you've got Wolfpack Performance, you've got your racing community. That's awesome. We've got a little racing community internal at Splunk that's a
Right.
mixture of some Splunk folks, some customers, some people from McLaren, where we have a Discord channel. And if you join that channel, we can give you access to like a little lab environment. We can show you how to instrument
Okay.
iRacing or F122 or F121, and soon F123, and we give you access to some of these labs and stuff. We don't share some of the really unique sort of competitive advantage stuff, like some of those racing charts I was talking about. And again, we can show you a lot of this stuff in videos. Your subscribers can check it out. We'll send some links.
Okay.
But we're going to continue like trying to help them under good competitive, good sporting rules,
Right.
using data to create competitive advantage. And candidly for us, like, it's such a cool story to be able to say, look, McLaren used data to create competitive advantage that's so good it might be, they thought it might be cheating. Isn't that what
Right.
every business owner in the world is trying to do? Like or
Right.
even every racer, like we're all just trying to get a little bit of competitive advantage gained fairly that sets us apart so we can go win or make more money or, whatever the outcome we want is.
True. That is very true. So this is what I am going to do. I would appreciate getting those links if
Mm-hmm.
you don't mind. I have a Discord group, the
Yeah,
Wolfpack
man.
Discord group, and I have a drivers club in there where only the drivers of that Discord group are allowed in. And then I have a Wolfpack instructor in Brian Miller, and he comes in and he offers information and he talks to the drivers, and then we race on Sunday. So if you don't mind, I would definitely love to get those links, share them with
Yeah,
them,
man.
as well as your Discord link for other people to
Absolutely.
join, and I can put that into this description of this video. So
Yeah, man.
let other people know anything that Splunk has coming up, whether that be events, whether that be something you're going to make
Yeah.
available to the public. Let them know real quick, as the floor is yours to kind of give them some headway on where to find you all and what to do.
Yeah, I'll go, and Kristen, you can kind of follow up if there's anything you want to add. One
Okay.
that I think is going to be super fun for the sim racing community is, are you familiar with the Logitech McLaren G Challenge?
No.
It's the annual. So Logitech hosts they partner with McLaren, and we're actually one of the title sponsors. Splunk is of the Logitech G Challenge, and you can just go to gchallenge.com. But
Okay.
it's the world's largest sim racing competition, and it invites drivers from around the globe to compete. And this year they're using Assetto Corsa Competizione, so it's on ACC, and it invites you to come compete to set fastest lap times in your region. And then they basically have this like 6 month sort of flow to where they have grand finals that will happen in March, and they'll actually have the 30 fastest drivers, so 10 from each of the regions, so the Americas, EMEA, and APAC, racing in the grand finals, and they'll be racing against Lando Norris and some other celebrity
Oh,
drivers. And so what's really fun about it, so we actually partnered with Logitech last year, and we provide the broadcast analytics for their broadcast. So if you imagine, just like when you watch an F1 race, you see those insights brought to you by AWS, like they do the
right.
projected overtake times and the, pit strategy decisions. We provide those same kinds of graphics and data-driven insights to the broadcasters for the G Challenge
Okay.
as they do. So we're really excited. That's going to be in March. Just go to gchallenge.com, sign up, race. Super fun. You can even play it on your Steam Deck. If you have a ACC on your Steam Deck, you can play it there. It's not as good as the wheeled pedals, obviously, but
Right.
I'm traveling, so it works. But we're going to be doing that, which is going to be really exciting. So we're going to be in Vegas in March with them as part of the broadcast. which is really, really cool. The other one I'd say is a big deal is just, generally the F1 season. We've got some fun announcements that'll be coming out later this year. So just if you check out, we're on Twitter and Instagram at Splunk. It's pretty easy to find, and a lot of our F1 content finds its way there. And then I do want to give a shout out. We attended the world's largest sim racing competition, our Sim Racing Expo, back in December in Nuremberg, Germany. So I don't know if you've heard of this thing. It's called the ADAC Sim Expo, and
No.
every major provider that makes sim racing gear, any of that stuff, everybody was there. And
Cool.
we actually got a chance to be in Logitech's booth, and this will blow your mind. They also had in their booth some people from the University of Limerick. Now, the University of Limerick is the only place in the world I know of that actually has a PhD program in sim racing analytics.
Cool.
So get this. You can literally, so University of Limerick has this, it's called the Lero group, and it's basically they're looking at esports and they're applying scientific research and methodology to it. I met with this guy named Dr. Adam Toth. He's a doctor of biomechanics and engineering, and he's looking at, they were actually doing the Tobii eye sensors to where they monitor where your eye position is.
Right.
They were collecting data about eye tracking, and we're actually providing them some telemetry data to start to do some really interesting research on driver performance and improvement over the next year. So just look forward to that. It's going to be, again, look at our social media handles. We'll be pushing some stuff out, but we're actually making scientific research investments in sim racing to improve driver performance and improve competitive advantage for teams. So we're really excited about it.
That's dope. Chris, what do you got?
So I got, this is actually the event that you and I met at. So Splunk is leaning heavily into our partnership through our Black Employee Resource Group.
Okay.
With a group called the Hidden Genius Project.
Yes.
And they're an outfit that helps young Black men get into STEM fields because historically super underrepresented. So we're at Splunk, we're trying to change that.
Yes.
And
Big shout out Brandon Dentel. Big shout out.
Yeah. So what I worked with some of those young Black men at that event, and I was like, they're doing really cool stuff with this. And I actually went and got one of those STEM robots that they were using to teach other people about how to program robotics, all that kind of stuff. And what we did at this event, and we just finished Brothers Code 2022. I was in Oakland, and a couple of my colleagues were in LA, and we were hammering home that there is no difference between the sensors that are in this thing and the sensors that are in an F1 car. They're all sensors. They all generate data. They all got to go somewhere.
Right.
And showing them how we do what we do with Splunk for F1 teams is no different than what they were actively doing with these robots at these events. So if they can make one of these go around and figure out how to get data out of that, they could do the exact same thing for F1. And these are like 9, 10-year-old kids that you start telling them about that and showing them mission control, showing them the charts that we were making and going, you're doing this right now. It's just on this scale.
Right.
You just put a couple more wheels on this and a couple more sensors. It's an F1 car. There is no difference between this rolling thing and that rolling thing. So really leveraging that partnership that we've got with them to get that message out there that the types of people that are doing the types of work that we've talked about today is well within reach for a whole lot of people. So that's what I've got. I just finished up another blog post on Brothers Code that we did. I'll send you the links for the blog post that Splunk made for Tech Summit Austin, and kind of the really in-depth stuff. I wrote a very in-depth article on how we kind of crafted this, like, I want to call it a curriculum in a way, because it is geared toward young people.
Right.
And making it, again, so that it's within reach for them to say, yeah, what they're doing in F1, I can do right now.
That is dope. Listen, I really love the way you put that in the context. Like, there's no different from this rolling thing to that rolling thing, and essentially that is not a lie. It is absolutely correct. Sensors, regardless if it's a high end sensor or a low end sensor, they're sending data. It is exactly the same thing, and your ability to tap into that stream and extract what information that you can then utilize to improve yourself or improve your device or improve your lap times, it's still there. Whether it's a $2.3 million car or it's a $30 RC car, it doesn't matter. So listen, what you got?
It's your heat maps in Call of Duty,
right.
Or it's one of my applications that I'm supposed to be monitoring for my business, or it's stuff that my phone is doing, or stuff that my NanoLeaf lights are doing.
Right.
It's all generating data. It's just figuring out what to do with it.
With the data.
And when you boil it down like that, like it is well within reach for everybody to just figure out, what that data that they're generating all around them is doing and do something useful with it.
Well, listen, I do appreciate you both, Chris and Corey, for joining me from Splunk. If you don't know what Splunk is, now you know that Splunk got a lot of funk to them. They out here in these Formula One streets, they in the esports streets, they out here at the grid streets. So reach out to Splunk. I'm going to make sure that I put all the links that they send to me in the description. I will be sharing links and articles that specifically that I can get from Chris and Corey into the Discord group, as well as their Discord link for other people to link up. So if you have a young mind that's sitting around and they show interest in anything like that, always feed them. It takes nothing to just give them some type of experience to see how far they'll go with that. Never turn it down. Always turn the lights on, and please be positive. With that, it's another episode of Performance Talk. We're out. Thanks for watching another episode of Wolfpack Performance. Don't forget to check out some of my other content on Formula One and motorsports topics. Like, share, subscribe, and we go live on the weekends. See you soon.